show you the agenda, but I don't think we can vote on next receiving minutes and all that. But we can hear the fiscal update and read that into the minutes. So Doug, I was hoping that you could give us an oral report on number one, the state of finances, number two, the federal grants, and number three, how the audit's going. So
Yep.
Take it away, Mr.
So, first I'm going to start. We normally have this in writing where we can see the figures, just due to timing and, overall circumstances. I'm just going to give a brief update. So far as funds, cash in hand, we have around $5.5 million. We are proud to say that the $1.1 million that we received from the federal government, which is the PPP loan, as of sometime in July was forgiven. So that debt has been absorbed from us. So it's for us, we spent it accordingly. So there's no more tracking for that. So that's in our bank account. And that's representative of the $5.5 million that I said that we have. We still have some of our ESSA money, which we got, which was $171,000 and some change, rounded up to 172. For the most part, we spent all of that. We filled some of those with positions that were needed to assist our kids coming back, like our social workers and case managers, to make sure that we are making sure that every kid is coming in the classroom. Every kid has the emotional support that he or she needs. We've also applied for about $102,000 in emergency, let's call it E-rate money. E-rate money is typically used for telecommunication. That application went off last week of August. We're waiting for approval. That should take place sometime in maybe end of September, mid-October. We requested 400 laptops. So essentially, it's not every kid in our school, but I think we hover around 475. So we have laptops anyway, but that will allow essentially every kid to have, again, a device to take home to and from school. We understand that our families, need that, and we qualify. So we're just waiting for the final approval. Csp Funds, and sorry, I don't know the initials for some of the, the acronyms, what they stand for. I have just so many of them. So Csp Funds was, again, another emergency group of funds that was used. And we used some of those funds to make sure that we had masks and other mandatory items so that we can open up the school appropriately. So that's kind of a quick synopsis of how we spent our money. And then to kind of dive a little bit deeper, from our last board meeting, our budget was approved. We still are in a great financial shape. And for next month, I will have a detailed report that goes out to the board. I will probably even backdate it to where we get to where we can see what really took place in September. September is when we usually have our first report out to the board, but usually September board meeting is a little later in the month, where it was a little tough to close out August with all the moving parts. So that's kind of really it. Any questions or thoughts? Feel free to ask. I love it when no one asks questions. No. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Doug. We have another trustee who's joined us. Cam, we don't quite have a quorum yet. Were you helping us get there? Do you have any updates on the first day back in the office at Columbia?
Yeah, to call it organized chaos, probably pretty on target, but not having been in the building since the 12th of March 2020, everything was pretty much intact. All of our students are on campus, so we're up and running.
And Laura, I think I just saw you come in. How are things
Yes,
with
hi.
you, Laura?
Nice to see everybody.
Tell us what's happening in the DOE.
Well, the reason I'm a couple minutes late is that we've been hosting a series of back to school family forums. So last week we hosted one in the Bronx and Brooklyn, Queens and Staten Island. And actually right now there is one happening fully in Spanish. And then at 8 o'clock this evening, there is a Manhattan forum from 8 to 9:30. And so it features the chancellor along with Danny Stevens from the Department of Health. And so there'll be, and then the executive superintendents, principals, borough office staff. And so there'll be a little bit of a presentation, but really a majority of the time will be spent answering families' questions. So I can share that information in the chat too, if anyone's interested.
I think that'd be great. I hope they watched our town hall videos to learn something.
Yes.
Okay, let's get started with the dashboard. So that's very light. It's just about enrollment right now, and that's the big story that we're trying to figure out. I think that's true in districts everywhere. Enrollment is down. These numbers that you're looking at are an estimate from information we have following the first day of school, which was last week, Wednesday. The second and third days of school were washed away by Hurricane Ida. So day 2 was actually today, which is supposed to be day 4. We have a little more information that I'll share with you from this document. We had 311, actually 312 students on the first day of school. We had about 320 or 21 today. We had 415 or so students on rosters, but the projection is based on expectation of some of the students not returning. So that estimated enrollment has fallen from 410 to 399 since last week, as today we've made a bunch more calls and people who we thought were coming are moving to Georgia and moving to Brooklyn and other places, far-flung places. And a few students are not returning for reasons that are not about moving, but are probably pandemic related as well. So we are facing a student deficit that's similar to what we've been anticipating over the summer and what were conservative projections. I think that this 399 number is still conservative. I think it'll be higher. I think it'll be closer to 410 by the time the dust settles. We have a lot of families who are not showing up in the first few days of school for a lot of reasons every year. So people who are traveling, we have some families family in South Carolina. We have a couple of families in West Africa, and so on. So there's that. The DOE starts Monday, and while we were able to get busing on the first day, we were not able to get busing today and tomorrow. So we have a number of families who have told us we can't come until busing starts, and so we're waiting until Monday to show up, even if they were there on the first day. So what is this deficit of about 95 or 100 students from the maximum mean? Budgetarily, it's not catastrophic. It's very far from ideal. It's concerning. We budget for 435 students from grades K to 5 and 36 students from grades from pre-K. Pre-K gets, I'll do a quick walk through the numbers orally and then take clarifying questions. We have 36 pre-K kids in our budget, and they have a significantly lower per pupil allocation. So every student from pre-K who's not with us matters less to the budget and the bottom line of the school than every student who's not with us from K to 5. It's about 60 or 70% higher tuition from K to 5 students than pre-K. So it's pre-K to 5 is where the focus really is. And so there are a few cushions that are built into the budget. So one cushion is, I mentioned 435 is the K to 5 budgeted enrollment number. The maximum enrollment is 468. So we assume, based on just attrition and people saying they're going to come and they don't show up, that 33 kids not coming. So that's built in. Second cushion that's built in is we always have a very conservative high cost special education figure built into the budget, which if you're not familiar with that is, Students who have intensive special education needs get additional per pupil funding that comes beyond the tuition. So if they have integrated co-teaching, for example, that helps us fund a second teacher in the classroom. So each of those students brings additional funding to support all of our services and programs that we offer to special education students, which are about 25 to 26% of our students. We always have a lower number in the budget, or we have for the past 7 or 8 years have had a lower number in the budget than have actually shown up. And it's been significantly lower for the last 3 or 4 years. So there's a kind of extra dollar amount that comes through in that rule. I don't have a final number of the IEPs and how much that will offset the deficit, but you will not see a budget when Doug runs the numbers next month that says we have 100 students less in terms of revenue. You'll see something like the impact of a couple of dozen students or a few dozen students, which is, again, a problem and not what we want to see, but it's a much smaller percentage of our budget and much less of a concern than you would see just the face of 100 students not being there. So that's the most important for the kind of long-term growth, survival, thriving of the school is that what is the budgetary impact of enrollment? It's not the only concern. The other concerns are operational concerns and just how well are we serving the community. So I want to speak about that for a minute. But before I do that, are there any questions about anything I've said about the budget and about the enrollment and how it impacts the budget?
I have one quick question. So the excess in amounts that we have because of students who receive services, being that we're sort of counting that in the overall pot to cover the enrollment deficits, will we have any sort of dings in services that we can provide, or are you saying articulating that we've always had an excess in each of the pots so that will be unaffected?
It's more the latter. We don't construct the budget. We don't construct the school staffing plan based on the budget, if that makes any sense in terms of special education services. We have integrated co-teaching in every classroom. We have integrated co-teaching in every classroom. We've used the federal funding to add additional mental health supports, which some students have mandated counseling. So if we have more kids in mandated counseling or fewer, we're still going to have the same number of social workers. Some of whom will provide those supports, for example. So our special ed services, except for related services, are so integrated into our program that we're essentially using the funding to fund what is a strong program for all learners, regardless of how many kids with IEPs and that high cost dollar show up. That makes sense?
It does, yep.
The other thing that we're seeing in news reports and hearing from colleagues is that districts across the country are dealing with enrollment changes. I don't understand where the children are going. If districts are dropping everywhere, I imagine some districts are growing. We certainly had a lot of kids move south this year and last year. So maybe there are places down south that are increasing in their enrollment, but we hear about districts around the country dropping, and we've even seen in our own building, the school that we share space with has a significantly lower enrollment than they did a year ago. That may change as the dust settles next week, but what some districts are doing is using that federal money to lower class size, as they put it. New York City is talking about that in the media. We're going to lower class size. You can't lower class size in a district unless you hire more teachers, and the city's not doing that. So I think what that means is New York City is planning on using federal money to offset enrollment decreases that are not anticipated. So it's another option for us. We have to look at the federal money that Doug talked about. It's a significant amount of money. We've spent some of it. We haven't spent all of it. And think about whether we want to just plug that in and say, okay, we're going to go from a cohort of 81 kids to a cohort of 70 kids in this grade, and we're going to use the federal money to backstop some of that. That'll be discussions that the executive committee, the school leadership team members, and the finance committee have in the coming days and months. But for now, we're going to continue to recruit and enroll new students and add new students in. But there's a possibility of offsetting some of that deficit as well. So the bottom line is fiscally, the school remains in a strong position, not as strong as it could be if we had full enrollment. But the most catastrophic threat that we were preparing for or feared or worried about in the spring when we first started, asking families, are you coming back? What's happening? And hearing about districts around the country and how COVID was impacting them after being away for a year and a half. Those worst fears are not coming to pass. Nothing that threatens this, the fiscal solvency of the school has come to pass. So at this stage, the finance committee will look at the numbers more closely, but it feels like the board's fiscal fiduciary duty is intact and the school is in good financial position. Now, in terms of the other effects of enrollment gaps, so it's positive to have smaller class size. Everybody wants more attention, but we will want to close these gaps at some point. So if we have cohorts that have, look at that first grade group, if you have a 25 student deficit that carries forward year after year, we won't be able to sustain that as the federal money dries up and as other districts shift their enrollment and so on, or without contemplating staffing cuts in the future, which we wouldn't want to do. So we will have to bring in new students, and we know that when we bring in new students in the upper grades, we often bring in students who have struggles academically, and so more services are needed to catch them up. That's a very simplistic way of saying it, but we know that we'll be able to weather the deficits we have now in enrollment, and they're not extreme, but we can't sustain those indefinitely, and we will have to address them at some point. So I think there's a good chance for any open conversation about it.
Yeah, a question, Steve. Are you and the executive team and the education committee looking at, the risk as we're looking at our charter coming due again, balancing the budget deficit, over time versus what this may do impacting our reaccreditation?
And when you say for charter renewal, in what sense do you mean? Will the authorizer look, frown upon us having a lower enrollment, or will it impact in some other way?
I think, is it the lower enrollment, or will they be fixated on test scores? Admittedly, students that you take in the upper grades more often than not struggle, and so how are you going to look at those both sides of that equation?
Yeah, I think when it comes to enrollment gaps, below if there's a greater than 15% variance between the maximum enrollment and the enrollment, then SUNY will look at that and ask us about it. I think that the volume of people moving out of state will be, explanatory enough. If you look at that, I haven't examined all the data because it's happening in real time. Like we're seeing kids right now today, an hour ago, telling us they're not showing up. But I think if you look at the aggregate, you'll see that the attrition that's not related to moving is similar to what it's been in years past, which has never been an issue. In terms of the adding new students later on affecting test scores, this is year 4 of our charter. It's the last year the test scores count for the renewal. So if we have, I'm sorry, I'm getting a call from France. I'm going to guess that's Peter.
I can talk, Steve, once we get to the next section, which is about data, just generally about the renewal question and how enrollment and data and all those things kind of go together.
So, Steve, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I just wanted to clarify that if the enrollment stays the same, reducing or closing classrooms and reducing staff is not on your is not on the table for this school year.
It doesn't seem like it's necessary.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions about enrollment or the impacts of enrollment? Okay, before we move on, I just want to give a couple of quick shout outs. Rocky's had her team mobilized to make hundreds of phone calls in the past week or two to get information about people. And we've had some staff members who've really stepped up to support families. And one of them is on this call, and that's Erica Adams. Erica has gone above and beyond to help one family one child in particular stay enrolled, and gone way beyond the call of duty. So big shout out to Erica. Thank you so much for your support. A fifth grader who otherwise wouldn't be enrolled because their family moved, but she's helping the family get there. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing and check the agenda. It is time for the data presentation, so maybe I'll share the slides, Dan and Viva, or whichever of you is going to share. If you could talk through what we've got, and I'll advance the screen.
Sounds good. So we're, as most people probably know, we're in year 4 of our renewal cycle, which is typically the year that SUNY comes and does their more extensive visit, sometimes over 2 days. Last renewal cycle, they came over 2 days, 2 different times, based on some of the things they saw. So they came twice. We're anticipating a visit from them. Our expectation would still be that they do come, though we're not sure exactly what their COVID protocols are. Usually they care mostly about test scores. If our test scores are not good, then the other accountability metrics don't really matter. I mean, they matter, but we can't get renewed without the test scores. We haven't had them the last 2 years, and this would typically be like the big year they look at, like what is the trajectory, and also where are we in year 4. And they have said, which I think is obvious also, which is that this year there are so many variables that they can't hold the typical weight they do. And so the data that we share right now is not test scores because we didn't take them, but we're going to share our F&P, which is one of our internal benchmarks for SUNY, and our Math IA, which is another internal benchmark. And mainly in the context of how we're using this to address needs now that we switch back to in-person. So Steve, if you can scroll so this whole chart is visible. Right there, yep. So you can see here our K-5, this is our percent at or above benchmark. Typically we want our numbers, everyone to be at 75 or over. And I think we knew that with a 1.5 year remote, we wouldn't be there, but it's still hard not to frame how we look at this with that 75% number. So there are some highlights here. There are some glaring opportunities for growth. What we tried to do was look at what was happening in each specific grade, and we used, we collaborated with David.
At least I've got, I guess he's at the meeting, right?
He is here. Welcome, Pete.
Okay, Pete's here. Hi, Pete.
And everybody.
Trying to look at what did work remotely, where were we seeing students grow, and where were we not seeing students grow, and then make changes, whether that is an allocation of resources in programming, in time of day spent on those subjects. So we saw a couple of highlights. If you scroll up, Steve. Oh, never mind. Real quick, Aviva, you want to talk about levels?
Yeah, just to add on here for F&P in particular, and Steve, just scroll to the center. Yep, perfect. Thank you. Just as a reminder, just to go a little bit in and then widen out, is to just share that in particular first grade, it's the most amount of reading growth that children have to jump through from going from beginning of first grade to end. And so it's the most amount of reading levels, and it's the hardest. And once children get to a certain point, then the levels will be a little bit easier. And so we did see, obviously in first grade, that number is glaring. We already have a lot of supports in place, including our talented academic intervention team, who are our reading specialists to support these students in particular. And We know that with their daily in-person instruction, and we also have stations and other things and structures in place to support these first graders who are now in second grade, and to support those needs, we are confident that we're going to see a ton of growth during this fall semester. And so just to name it, as the lower grades, in particular, strength is our differentiation that we've been doing during the remote and now in person, but it's going to be a grow area to support these current second graders to be where they need to be over the next few months.
Yeah, and similarly, we have some context and for each one of these grades and why they performed at the level they did, ready for the education committee when we meet. Without getting in the weeds about all of them, there are different things that led to certain grades being really high and certain grades being low. Steve, you can go up. So we looked at also our special population. Something we made sure was we over communicated in terms of students getting services, even if they are remote, and then also getting their ENL services. So making sure that our 2 ENL teachers were meeting with students, and we saw in certain grade levels a lot of success. Some of that success was correlated to the grade overall being successful. But in 4th grade, 81% of ENL students at or above benchmark is higher than we've ever been. 2nd grade, 71. If you scroll up one more time, Steve, 80% of our special education students K to 5 grew, which if you're following the news, one of the biggest concerns is, are students with disabilities being left behind? And while learning losses, obviously, are they growing as much as they should have during a normal year? We were seeing our students, our exceptional students, grow. To that point, over 80% of our students grew in general. So grew at least a reading level. And in different grades, that means different things. It may be a little bit. If you're in the lower grades, it may mean, one level could be half of a year in some of the upper grades. Our goal here was really to look at what we knew it wasn't a normal F&P, but we needed to know where students were when they were coming back and also compare students to each other. So we made some staffing changes. We hired an extra AAS teacher for that intervention work. We adopted a differentiated word work program for the upper grades. Typically, it was a more one-size-fits-all sort of embedded word work program, but knowing that students were coming up with gaps in phonemic awareness and some of those things, we have one that starts basically wherever you come in, there is a pathway for those students. So we're starting that. We started running records today. So we are doing progress monitoring immediately. And then we noticed that some of the classes or grade levels with the lowest achievement level had the highest concentration of brand new teachers to the profession, which is not surprising, but we never really looked at it that closely before. And so we have one of our instructional leadership team members has created a scope and sequence for a year-long new teacher development program to be supporting new teachers in addition to all the other support they would get, specifically around some of these practices that will yield high student achievement.
And so in the spring, we also conducted an end-of-year math interim assessment, IA's interim assessment. And you can see the stats here for achieved, approaching, and below. And achieved also is encompassing those who were above the level as well. And so for our math IA, we tested students across kindergarten through 5th grade on math standards, Common Core, some of our priority standards. And these are the standards that the Common Core deems as like priority for the grade level. And so we assess students virtually. In the lower grades, we assessed either individually or in small groups. And in the upper grades, we did with classes. And then we also differentiated for special education needs and also our multi-language learners. And so if you can continue to scroll, Steve, I just want to name a couple of things around math. Thank you. And so if you look here, again, if you look at the ENL, which is students who are considered multi-language learners, there are some really strong stats in the lower grades, 76%, 66%, and 80% in second grade for students who are at or above benchmark. If you look on the left here, some highlights that we were really excited about as well. Like in second grade, 65% of students who are identified with special education services did really well. There were also some obviously areas of growth. And so a couple of things just to name it for our community here, what we're doing currently. We will talk in a little bit about our MAP test, MAP, which is a norm reference test, and there is a math component. So right today was our first day of math testing, and so we are already assessing students to learn their ELA and math scores from this is now day 2 of our school. But specifically in math, our director of math, Joe, has looked at the schedule and looked at scope and sequences, and we have now 2 days a week that are specific intervention blocks that are on the schedule for all classrooms to address certain gaps in learning and also to support some accelerated learning for those who are ready for it. And so we have it on everyone's schedule, and teachers are going to be planning and differentiating based on some of these standards from last spring and based on the current needs of the groups. And we will continue to analyze our new data that's coming in around math data, which we now have in person. A big struggle last year was a lot of families and students didn't have all of the math manipulatives they needed. And for especially lower grades and even into third grade, having those math concrete tools is really important to support the learning in our constructivist math approach. And now that children have their cubes and manipulatives here on site, and for anybody who is remote, will have the tools that they need. And we really believe that through that process and supporting our teachers in their development and their supports and skills in math, we will see some growth, tremendous growth in the fall as well. Steve, if you can continue, and I'll pass it over for questions.
Any questions, comments?
A couple of questions. In both categories here, I see in the third grade in special ed and in the fifth grade for E&L students, a remarkably lower level than in other cases. Any insight into why that's the case?
Yeah, so I think there are two reasons. Third grade in general for math, and it wasn't necessarily, in certain grades we saw the achievement in a grade level was similar in both reading and math. Third was not as similar based on the numbers we're looking at here. Third grade is just there are a lot of brand new concepts taught. So while all grades build on each other, third and fourth grade, you're doing more like bigger numbers for multiplication division, and fifth grade even bigger, and also volume. There are also brand new concepts like multiplication division, like fractions that they've never done, and not having the in-person flexibility hampered the grade in general. And so it feels like in some ways a tier 1 issue, which is like there was basic needs of students were not being met in certain related to certain concepts. And these conversations were happening in data meetings from unit level tests. So these scores, while disappointing, were not super surprising. We talked about concepts that students were just not getting, reteaching, intervention. Our math coach was meeting with groups. Our leadership team was meeting with groups for math to try to address some of these, and we just didn't do it. In terms of the E&L, I can't tell you a specific reason why fifth would be so much lower. You can see a drop off in the upper grades. The testing setting was different in the upper grades. And I think that accounts for some of it. Aviva mentioned that all the lower grades tested in very small groups or individually, meaning, so while the upper grades saw a slide and they may have had it read out loud, it was with a lot of kids on the screen and didn't necessarily have a chance to ask a question or, can you reread that? And so I think part of, again, is tier 1 execution issue. That said, we have all this data crunched, and we have the time carved out in the day to make sure that the gaps are addressed at the beginning of the year. And so we're taking seriously the drop in certain grades.
Thank you.
Pete and Margaret and I had a discussion with members of the SUNY Charter Schools Institute last week, talking about the next topic, but we touched on data and about accountability too. And I don't think they can speak for the SUNY Board of Trustees, who will make the decision about renewal in a year and a half. But from their point of view, they understand that the data in the last couple of years is going to be fraught, and there are going to be lots of issues. They understand that there's lower achievement, that for many families, survival was, and for many staff too, survival and community building and keeping things intact were the priorities. So no one's excusing low achievement, but the focus is going to be on growth at this point, and that's, I think, a national conversation. So I'm not saying it doesn't matter how we did last year, but the important thing is one of the things that Dan just said, which is, we're starting the year already addressing gaps. So that's the mandate from the authorizer, and that's how we're approaching things. Okay, so on to that topic. we've got a couple of resolutions that the board's going to vote on. We now have a quorum. So Pete, do you want to go back and take us to the minutes and ask for any feedback, the comments, and accept the minutes? The last meeting was
I move that we accept the minutes of the June, well, actually it's the June meeting. Any objections? Okay, we'll consider those minutes accepted, please.
Okay, so for trustees, thank you, Pete. The board members got this memo that the executive committee approved in August, explaining some shifts in leadership structure, as well as talking about some of the other things we're doing as a school this year. So I think I could take a stab, Pete, if you want to fill in and add anything, and then Dan and Eva jump in as well. Describing the memo, and the executive committee has already acted on behalf of the board, so there's no need to vote or just to receive it. But then we have a couple of related resolutions to vote on. So we're shifting from a solo principal model to a co-executive director and co-principal structure. Margaret and I will be co-executive directors. Dan and Viva taking on the co-principal role. This has come about for a number of reasons. It sort of solved a lot of issues that the school and the board have been dealing with in the past few years. It'll get us ready for renewal and just for improved student achievement and coherence as a school. It is also, I have to underscore the importance of the pipeline of talent coming from the teacher and secondary leader core. So we've got this instructional leadership team, and we've got Doug and Rocky, who will play a dual role on the executive team with us, as well as the school management team with Dan Aviva and our two directors of student and family supports. And then the coaching team is part of that instructional leadership team as well. So we've got this powerful cadre of leadership. SUNY asked us, are you adding more people to this administration? And the answer is no. It's the same positions, but enhanced profiles, more responsibilities on certain people, and a different focus.
And
Pete,
for me, one of the big aspects of this is very important. Going back to maybe when I joined the board, whatever that was, 10, 12 years ago, we've been trying to urge the senior management of the school to be more focused on external affairs, outreach, and that sort of thing, but the burden of day-to-day management largely prevented that. And one of the best aspects of this new arrangement is not only a strengthening of overall school leadership, but an opening to enhancing the school's profile in the community, and all that goes with it, from better enrollment to better fundraising to better whatever. And that's one of the reasons I'm supporting this throughout all aspects, but that's one of the ones that really hits home with me.
So exciting thing is that we'll be able to do that outward facing role. We're in a transition period. Margaret and I are very heavily involved in operations, supporting Raquel in her transition to the school. But as time goes on and the dust settles, we will be doing those things that Pete described. And the school will have not one, but two principals, and better principals than they had before at that. So I'm excited about what's to come with this change. So thanks everybody for stepping up. The other part of this, there are two other areas. One is NWEA. So we will be, Dan mentioned it earlier, we started MAP today. It's the measures of academic progress. We first used it about 10 years ago, and we use it for a few years. We understand the limitations of it as well as the value added, and we know this is the right time to bring it back for all the reasons mentioned above. And our authorizer has also given its blessing to this and said, you know, you need this data because the state tests aren't valid really at this time. Like, we just don't know what state tests are going to tell us. So the MAP assessment is a nationally normed standardized test that we will give twice a year for the foreseeable future, and help build our case for renewal and measure our growth. The big thing about MAP is growth, 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 growth. Finally, we are doing a little bit of remote learning. We only have a few students enrolled in it right now. We're keeping the plan intact so that if we have to quickly quarantine or shut down for any reason, a part of the school, the whole school, we can do it. We've made some medical accommodations for kids who can't be on campus in this time of COVID. Okay, so that takes us to the resolutions the board will vote on, and there are a couple. One is, I'm sorry to say, well, here there's school-wide goals, which we have not finalized yet, but we are using to guide what are the changes and outcomes that we'll expect to see for all this. I'm sorry to say that Hallie Gittleman-Smith is resigning from the board, and she's doing that because of her personal and professional commitments at this time, mostly personal, that have shifted. She feels that she can't give the time that she could have when she started out, and she wants to send everyone her best wishes, and also she pledged to offer any support she could in a transition, and I hope that means recommending a new trustee to take her place on the education committee, because the time that she was able to give was helpful and valuable. So we're sorry to lose her, but Pete, do you want to add anything about Hallie's service or
as I wrote her today in a little note, I'm very grateful for her role on the board. I think most of you know that I hold the education committee in high esteem. I think in most cases it's the most important committee we have. She's been, by all accounts, a very effective member of that committee, and I applauded her contributions in that regard, and I'm delighted. I'm unhappy she's leaving, but I'm delighted with the service she gave us in the time she could, and I know, as most of you do know, her life situation changed a great deal from the time she was brought onto the board until the last couple of years. So I thank Hallie for hanging in there, and I'm sorry she's leaving, and I agree with you. I hope she'll suggest somebody that might provide a similar range of competencies for us.
Okay. Thank you, Pete. And speaking of transitions, Pete, when you signed on as the chair, how many years ago? Was it 5 years ago?
6 years ago, I guess now. I don't.
You said, I'll do this
I'm
for a couple years.
so old now that I don't know how to count anymore.
You said, when I turn 65, we're going to turn this over to somebody else. Well, we've...
I celebrated my 79th birthday about 2 weeks ago.
So then it was 6 years ago, because you said a couple of years I'll turn 75. We've finally found that person to succeed you, and that is our own Voica Soto. Sometimes you don't have to look far to find what you've been looking for, far and wide. So I'd like to take this time to introduce this resolution by thanking Pete for his service as chair, and for nominating Voica and explaining and having our community explain how she'll be such a powerful successor to Pete. Ken, I know you wanted to say a few words. Do you want to say something about Pete or about Voica or both?
About both. I mean, I've had the opportunity to work very closely with Pete, and he really signed on for a short stint, and but he gave so much to it. And Pete's vision always was for this particular position to reside with someone in the community, and that for a variety of reasons it took some time to get there. But in Voica we have someone who not only is in the community, but has, along with Monica and Marie, created community. And this is really, this was the vision. And so, I was with Pete when we interviewed Voica for trusteeship several years ago. And, we both thought there was so much depth to what Voica could bring to the board, and clearly that has been evidenced in her work. I said to Pete that I would certainly champion Voica's candidacy, and for me, the bittersweet part of it is Pete is a very dear friend, will remain a very dear friend. And I thank him for the opportunity that he gave me, and I don't want to speak for Brandy, but for the two of us to be his co-chairs. And I know that we're looking forward to working with Voica in that same way. And the executive committee, we're all thrilled that Voica has agreed to take on this very important position at a pivotal time.
Thank you, Ken, very much for all you've done, for all you've done, and your great support and those kind words. I'm delighted that we've been able to find a voice in Voica who I think will elevate the position of the school, both internally and externally. And I hope you'll keep up the terrific work you do, and Brandy does too, in supporting her.
Any other trustees want to add anything?
I do.
I resign.
Are you
No, I'm kidding.
bad?
No, I feel so privileged with this love fest going on here. I hope you guys, I hope I do this position justice in that, you know, I carry the torch that Peter has carried these past 6 years, just as wisely as he did. So I look forward to really digging in and just being a you know, more fruitful part of Harlem Link.
I think that some of the, aside from the things that have been said, Voica, some of the things that your behaviors that you've shown on the board that are going to be so helpful are you can be very reserved and take a lot in and listen, but then you have no problem asking really uncomfortable, difficult questions. And I think that's the role of a trustee. You know, you need to push the envelope sometimes, and you have a way of making sure that anybody who maybe is thinking something or isn't going to ask it will have that question asked and answered, and you'll hold our feet to the fire and you'll follow up. I think that's, you know, that's what we're looking for from a board, to hold the school to the same level of expectation that the leadership holds the staff to and the staff hold the children to. So, you know, you're setting an example for us. I know you will. Anybody else on the board want to share a thought?
Steve, just quickly, I concur with what you said. I think that's one of Voica's great strengths, is her strength, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you to both of you on that. And Peter, you're not going anywhere, right? You're still on the board.
We have to, as a side issue that's not appropriate for this discussion, but we have to get this term thing straightened out in the near future.
Okay.
Everything's been in suspension for the last 20 months or so, whatever it's been. And but a couple of us, like John and me, have. I'm not quite sure where we stand on term limitations and all that kind of stuff. But as long as I'm eligible to serve Harlem Link, I will do so with pleasure and admiration for the school and the people who run it.
I just want to say something. Peter, it's been a joy working with you and getting your guidance on particular issues, and just watching you come and interact with our parents, our students, and it's a joy. And you can't leave the board. You still have to be around somewhere for input, okay? Also,
John, is that a threat of martial art application if I don't do this?
no, I won't beat you up. And Voica, I've worked with you on this outreach committee, and listening to the ideas you come up with, it's like fascinating. And also you're very precise about the way you do things. So I think you're going to be a really great chair for the board. Also, it's like, how can I put it? I listen to women more nowadays. That's because I've been married so long.
Yes, smart man, smart man.
My wife is smiling at this point.
Thank you so much, John.
You're welcome.
Takes all kinds. So some of the accomplishments are from Peter's time as chair are listed in the resolution here. School expanded maximum student enrollment by over 50%, consolidated space into a dedicated building, modernized its benefits program, and achieved a 5-year charter renewal. Some of these were way in the past, but those were like the sequence of events over the last 5 or 6 years. It took some forbearance for us to achieve the space that we have, and sometimes we neglect to talk about that. We stayed strong while there was drama happening around us that didn't involve us, and the dust settled, and we held firm to our values and approach, and we ended up with a larger space than I think most charter schools have in Harlem. I believe we're the only charter school in Harlem that has the main office of a school building. And Pete, that example of your steady and purposeful and mission-oriented leadership, I think really helped set the tone for that. It gave us legitimacy in the community.
One of the things that I'm proudest of, Steve, is essentially prided in what you and Margaret and the soon-to-be co-principals and the faculty in general did in March of 2020. You and I had a series of phone conversations you may remember now that involved everything from, are we going to close down, are we going to open up, are we going to buy Chromebooks, and so on and so forth. And the creation of a curriculum, an effective curriculum, and you can see it in the numbers we've discussed tonight. And the fact that Zoom work, to my mind, it was jaw-dropping. And I don't have a vast knowledge of education systems, but I do know of the New York education systems, but I do know just from my family and the family of friends of other families and so forth, that the kids in Harlem Link got a much better deal than the kids at most other schools, including some private schools. And that I think is an extraordinary thing to say.
Thank you, Pete. You absolutely were right there. I forgot about those conversations. That was a frantic time. Hope to never have those again. So without further ado, should we vote on these two resolutions? Pete, do you want to give us one last meeting? Yeah.
I'm sorry, what are the two resolutions?
Resolve the board accepts the resignation of Hallie. And
first, I didn't realize that's the resolution. Resolve that we accept the resignation with gratitude of Hallie Gittleman Smith and applaud all that she's done for the school. Any objection?
Second.
Oh, excuse me, second. Any objection? So I believe I could say we have accepted Hallie's resignation, however reluctantly. And then I resolved that the board will elect Voika Soda to the position of chair and recognize Peter Carey for more than 5 years of service in that role. And will anybody second that resolution?
I enthusiastically second that.
Any objection? Therefore, I say adieu. I'm in France after all, and or I can say bonne nuit, and most of all, I say bienvenue à Voika. I think you're just going to do a great job. Thank you very much.
so Voika, when's the first chair executive director meeting? When are you going to start holding our feet to the fire? All right, you don't have to answer now. All right.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay, so the last order of business, and then besides the special addendum, is to talk about the board meeting schedule. So we have dates, so we don't have a time. We can continue this 6:15 time, which was the pre-pandemic time. During the pandemic, as it began, we moved the time around. We had daytime, we had all kinds of different things, a lot more flexibility with Zoom. It was only last week that the new governor extended the open meetings law exemption on allowing remote meetings to January. They had run out in the summer. So we were going to have this meeting in person, but last week the governor shifted the rules. So we will continue to have Zoom meetings through at least January. We're also limiting visitors in the building to essentially 0. We're checking vaccination status for visitors who come into the building or taking PCR tests as a pass. So we're trying to avoid having in-person meetings. That said, is there any sentiment on the board, and this is something the executive committee can come back to and make a final decision later this month, but about the timing of the meetings the rest of the year?
I think the working members, the people on the board who work
Yeah,
on that.
6:15 works, generally works, I think, great.
Yeah, and as the sooner that we can sort of set that schedule, the sooner I can block those dates as best I possibly can.
Okay, so it sounds like the sentiment of the board is to keep this the pre-pandemic times, so we can pretend like the rest of the country, the pandemic is over.
Steve, can I just say, and
yeah.
I don't expect necessarily to change the arrangement, but it's sort of no man's land for staff members to join. Thursdays are 5 o'clock days. So if people have a commute to get home, it's either leave right away to get home and try to hop on, or have to stay. And so we may notice that there are fewer staff members at them if they're at 6:15, specifically on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
I agree with that. Speaking as someone from work, I would say that it's tricky to get back and forth. So I think if we could try to mix it up so that some others can join, that would be awesome.
One option is to move them off Tuesday, Thursdays and onto Wednesdays. Would that be helpful? We can put that in the mix and bring this back to the executive committee and come up with a solution. It's a good point. Yeah, Margaret and I had to leave early to come here, to come back for this, and Dan, you got hustled back and you're still at school. So I hear that it's a mess in terms of the school hours and this timing. Okay, without further ado, I want to introduce our final surprise guest of the night. That is Mr. Josh Breitbart, who's going to make an appeal. Josh, take it away.
Hi, everyone. How's it going? I won't keep you all too long. First of all, Pete, sad to see you go. Voika, nothing but the best. I'm looking forward to seeing all your work on the chair. I am just reaching out really quick to everyone on the board. As advancement is picking up, this is an appeal I make every single year, and I want to be able to make it again to everyone, which is board donations. Every single year when we go for grants, fundraising and stuff, it always looks good for us all to be on the same page, for us all to be working as one. So we ask you all to donate what you can. I know it's different for every single person. Some people like to give general donations, which is fine. You can use our website for information on how to donate. But some people like to fund events or give in other ways. And if you would like to give in those ways, please reach out to me. Me and Doug can definitely help set you up. But I just wanted to appeal to you and say how important it is to have all the board members active and engaging in this. So reach out to me if you have any questions, if you want to know how you can donate or other ways that you can get involved. And I look forward to an update next month about where advancement's going and our upcoming plans for fundraising. Any questions?
If I could be helpful, as you know, Josh and Steve, it's in my blood. love asking people for money. But if, you know, if we, you know, I'll look and see, and if need be, I'll have some follow-up conversations with board members individually. It's really important. And the reason that one of the reasons that we did so well during the pandemic, outside of the outstanding job that our teachers and staff did in the time they committed to it, was the amount of money we were able to raise for Chromebooks, so that as many students as possible had access. And I know that there are going to be some similar needs, and so it's incumbent upon all of us to do what we can to help the cause. And we'll talk a lot more on future meetings about your networks and how we really can amplify the great work that teachers and staff are doing.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Ken and Josh. And yes, you can look forward to more updates. I think you'll hear more about fundraising in the fall and into the winter than you did a year ago, because of the shifting needs of the school and the change in the pandemic status. Now that we're back on campus, hopefully for good. Okay, any last thoughts or comments?
Ken, is that your wine cooler over your left shoulder?
It is one of them, yes.
Just
Usually that's usually where I pull something out for you. It's usually out of that one. So.
all right. Can't go wrong with that.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Congratulations to everybody who's stepping up here, and I appreciate the service of all the trustees and of course the staff members too. So have a great night, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you, Steve. Congratulations, Wojciech.
Thank you. Bon nuit. Yeah? Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you very much for your time.
Good night.